Um, Another advantage of ethanol, but more in its fuel cell usage, is that when used in fuel cells, it's cost effective and efficient. And there is a research team based in the United States and internationally that's been working on the use of ethanol for extraction of hydrogen and use in fuel cells. The wonderful thing about all fuel cells is their only byproduct is water. And of course, the corn, the wonderful thing for us is it can be made here in the USA, and it can also be made, of course, in other countries as well. The biggest disadvantage of fuel cells right now, and probably the reason why most of us aren't driving around in cars with fuel cells, is storage capacity. Pure hydrogen occupies 3,000 times the space of traditional gasoline. Well, we'd all be either driving gigantic cars, or they're going to have to come up with some new technology to store the hydrogen in a compact area, as well as utilize that tightly compressed or stored hydrogen to make it possible. One of the problems I've run into is that, of course, being hydrogen, it is somewhat unstable when condensed, and so it is going to be somewhat challenging to find a way to utilize it as the fuel for the future. Another dilemma that we face is there's no hydrogen fuel station infrastructure right now. In other words, even if you had a car that would run on hydrogen by utilizing a fuel cell, where would you get gas? A good thing that's come of ethanol is if ethanol can be used to produce hydrogen for fuel cells, there's a lot of places that corn can be grown and also moved to in order to provide a source for the hydrogen fuel. So ethanol and fuel cells could be the perfect mix for the fuel of the future. Another potential con, though, is that, as I was mentioned before, there's other renewable sources that are being looked into, sugar cane, and in Illinois we have prairie grass, which is being considered as a great alternative. One of the nice things about prairie grass and some of the other grasses that could potentially be used to produce hydrogen for fuel cells is it puts nitrates into the ground, which is good for the earth. So those are some of the pros and cons.
Thank you, Brent. I'm Paul Wyckoff. I'm going to tell you a little about the issues with ethanol and the different sides involved. For the fuel consumer, which is most people that drive and need transportation, is right now the gas prices have gotten fairly high and are likely to go higher this summer and for the future. It's very unlikely that we will return to $1.50 gasoline. And so the economic incentive is there to start finding these alternative fuels. Another aspect involved with the fuel consumer with ethanol is the concern of lower fuel economy. Ethanol has a lower amount of energy per unit than gasoline has, so the consumer needs to know that that is going to occur, and also realize that the price of ethanol is usually lower than the price of gasoline, and there are also tax incentives, tax rebates that can be used to offset that. Also, most cars can run on the E10 blend, so they would still be using 90% gasoline, but the 6 million flex fuel vehicles, like my wife and I have, can run on 85% ethanol, greatly reducing the amount of petroleum that's used and the pollution levels. Another side is the farmers and agribusinesses and the ethanol biorefineries. By using any kind of crop for making ethanol, because many crops can be used to make ethanol, and at some point we will hopefully switch over from corn into, well, in addition to corn, probably into the prairie grasses and miscanthus. It supports the prices that farmers receive for their crops. When farmers get paid more for their crops, there's more money in the local economy, and it boosts the local economy. Also, these biorefineries provide jobs, and each job that's needed at the biorefinery needs people supporting it with their jobs in the service community. What it'll also do is Grain prices are worldwide, so if the grain price goes up in America, it also goes up across the world. So the impoverished nations and their farmers will benefit from higher grain prices. Another side to the ethanol issue is the oil industry. Basically, ethanol is a direct competitor to petroleum. So it is up to these companies if they want to join in and be part of the migration towards biofuels, which would be similar to what we've seen with other technologies. You start out with one technology and work your way into another technology, and you become a different business with the same name. Some oil companies are doing this. BP has recently joined with DuPont to spend $500 million at UC Berkeley and the University of Illinois to do research on ethanol and biofuels. And Marathon is joining with the Andersons Grain Company to build ethanol biorefineries. I believe there are some others also that are starting to get on board with that. And they're a great, obviously making hundreds of billions of dollars, they're a great source of research dollars to make this happen. Another side is the fuel stations. Right now, fuel stations actually make very, very little money, and many of them lose money selling gasoline because it's the oil companies that are receiving, and the refineries that are receiving the $2.85 that you're spending on gasoline. And the fuel stations mostly make their money by selling soda and popcorn and chips and that kind of stuff. One aspect with the fuel stations is that it is expensive for them to install their pumps. So if they're able to use a current pump with a gas tank that can hold it, that usually costs a couple $1,000s for them to switch over, and there are tax incentives for them to decrease that cost. But also, it can cost a couple $100,000 to dig up the ground and put a tank in and put in a whole new pump. And there are tax incentives to help with that as well, tax rebates. The environmentalist side of the ethanol issue, there are positives and concerns about the ethanol issue. Many of the positives have to do with the decreased use of petroleum, the decreased carbon dioxide in the air because it's a cyclical nature, it just keeps on going through the crops, and the decreased smog, which helps with people's health. Many people die every year just from smog. One of their fears is that if we pour too much into biofuels, too much interest and too much money into it, well, we won't be interested in spend money on other things such as increasing fuel economy of vehicles. So there are a number of environmentalists that are actually against ethanol, mostly because they want to support their own different type of technology. And then the other side would be the United States soldiers. Just about everybody, even people in the petroleum industry, have family members that are over fighting in the Middle East. And most people would agree that although they may have all kinds of reasons to be fighting over there, the government really needs the constant flow of petroleum coming here. So the less dependent we are on foreign oil, the less costly it is to provide the military over there. And how do you fix the cost to all the lost lives of the soldiers? Present and future, this will wrap up our presentation. Right now there is a rapid expansion in the biofuels industry, especially ethanol. Last year there was 3 billion gallons produced. Right now we can produce 5 billion gallons with all the ethanol refineries coming online. And a year and a half from now they'll be able to do 8 to 12 billion gallons of ethanol. So it's very quickly growing. But still that's only about 10% of our gasoline fuel supply that we would replace with ethanol.